You send a request to record because then it pops up for me and I can. For all the things you might need to put together your piece. Anyway, with that said, we have two people speaking today. First off, we'll have Rita Bettis Austin, who is the ACLU of Iowa Legal Director. And then she will be followed by Megan Graham, who is the Clinical Associate Professor at the University of Iowa College of Law, and she's also the Director of the Technology Law Clinic. They'll both speak briefly. We will then open it up to questions. So with that, Rita, do you mind getting started?
No, not at all. Thank you, Veronica. I am Rita Bettis Austin, and I'm the legal director for the ACLU of Iowa. So the report that we are releasing today was researched and written by the University of Iowa's Technology Law Clinic. And in particular, just before I get started, I want to credit the law students who led these efforts, Mia Savicevic and Ethan Miner, and then, of course, also Professor Graham, who's on the call with us, who directs the clinic. So before I do turn it over to Professor Graham to dig into the report, I want to talk at a high level about why we undertook to work on this and why now. So the ACLU has long held concerns about automatic license plate readers, or ALPRs, and the ACLU of Iowa has been engaged in education and policy advocacy around ALPRs actually since around 2014. So quite a long time. But over the last couple of years, they have just exploded in our state and nationally. And the fact that there are just far more cameras, more law enforcement using them, and new software and new tech tools like AI that are being integrated into ALPR technology. This has all taken our already significant privacy, civil rights, liberty concerns from the days back in 2014 and just put them on steroids. And Iowa taxpayers collectively have been spending huge amounts of money, likely without any realization that they're doing so in most cases, to be subject to ALPR surveillance. So, as an organization, we've also heard from Iowans all over the state who are deeply worried about all of this, and for good reason. So, what are ALPRs, and why should we all start paying attention really right away to the risks that they pose and what we as Iowans need to do to protect ourselves? ALPRs are camera systems that are used primarily by law enforcement that capture and read license plates on all passing vehicles. So, not just people that they suspect of violating a law. And they record plate numbers, dates, times, and locations. And this creates a record of where a vehicle was at a specific moment. I think of ALPRs as having two specific components. To sort of worry about and track and think about and understanding them and how they're different than from red light cameras or speed cameras. So one is the physical camera itself, and that's used to actually capture the picture of the license plate and the car. And that also then captures the location of the license plate and the car. And then the second component, as I think about ALPRs, is the non-physical sort of tech software side of things. And this is how the data is being pooled, collected, stored, and shared for access, how it's accessed, for what reasons, and by whom. Okay. So all of these things working together sort of create the body of concerns, the things that put Iowans at risk for these civil liberties and privacy concerns. Okay. So unlike speed cameras, unlike red light cameras, ALPRs are being placed along roadways throughout Iowa, and they're taking thousands of snapshots of all of the license plates that are going by, of all of the vehicles. And then that information can be fed into a network of nationally shared databases that are being maintained by these private vendors who contract with local governments to put these cameras up and access the data. So Flock, which is the largest vendor of ALPRs that Iowa governments are contracting with to put up these cameras and get the data on drivers in Iowa, has a business model that really encourages communities that it contracts with to feed that data from its cameras into a national database system in exchange for them being able to then access the data that's coming from other communities. One technical thing that I want to flag that's so important for people to understand, it's not the case like with a red light camera where you can look up and you can see there's a camera right there on the traffic light. ALPR cameras are actually small enough that you likely don't know that you're passing one, and there's nothing in Iowa code, for example, that requires that Iowans are told about ALPRs, or tracking them, or are given notice on the road that an ALPR is installed and tracking them. ALPRs can be stationary. They can be placed in one location, but they also can be mobile. So they can move around, for example, on patrol cars. We did learn or I should say really the clinic learned in doing this report, that in fact, some Iowa law enforcement are refusing to disclose to us where they've installed cameras. So Bettendorf and Olwine claimed that the number and location of their ALPRs were confidential under Iowa's open records law. and declined to provide them to the clinic. Altoona and Davenport also said that the number and location of ALPRs were confidential, although notably, um, it's both good that we have access to the information, but also it's concerning that the law enforcement agencies did not know this. They didn't realize that an online search was sufficient to get to the sort of vendor website that provides the list of cameras, where they are and how many they are for those towns. So that's for Altoona and Davenport. And it's really critical that the public and frankly law enforcement know that this is not infallible technology that we're all being subject to. ALPRs can be inaccurate. ALPRs have been found to have an error rate of about 10%. So that means about 1 in 10 license plates recorded have an error. And that does mean that you can be targeted by police as being on a hot list in error, for example. And that has happened in the past. That can be very dangerous. So the report cites incidents nationwide in which ordinary people just going about their daily lives, even with children in the car, have been flagged as dangerous and stopped and detained by police, sometimes at gunpoint due to an ALPR error, something as simple as getting a number or a letter wrong in a license plate. So without any rules limiting who can access data and for what reason, and without any warrant requirements being placed on access by the local governments who are using ALPRs, we're all at the mercy of the good judgment of the police all around the country, not just in Iowa, who have ALPR access. So we're lucky that, of course, many law enforcement officers do have good judgment and do want to protect people's rights. But that doesn't mean that they all do. And unfortunately, we do know that ALPRs have been abused by police. Some high profile abuses that have been uncovered include Texas police searching some 83,000 flock cameras around the country to look for a Texas woman who they believed had an abortion. They found her using Illinois ALPR cameras. You know, Illinois is a place where, of course, abortion remains legal. And the report also cites other abuses like police using ALPR tech to find and stalk exes. So it's just really important that people understand this technology and the risks. There is no state law, there's no local ordinance or policy that we required, that we reviewed that requires law enforcement to get a warrant to use these databases or to target and track people in this way. I do want to say there are non-objectionable potential uses of ALPRs, like checking license plates against lists of stolen cars, assisting in Amber Alerts, or collecting tolls. But again, there's no state law that actually limits Iowa law enforcement to these legitimate uses, or even if they are used by one particular law enforcement agency in that limited way, there's nothing to require anyone else who's accessing the data similarly to follow those limits. And then just beyond the specific ALPR concerns that we have around accountability and transparency, we ran into serious noncompliance with Iowa open records law in pulling the report together. So of the 48 agencies that the clinic sent requests to, 5 did not respond to the substance of our request before publication. And I just want to name those. Those were the Des Moines Police Department, the Clinton Police Department, the Fayette Police Department, the Fremont Police Department, and the Mills Police Department. I do think that it's ironic that our interest in trying to get access to these public records is to ensure the privacy of Iowans. And in comparison, the police that are withholding these records are saying that they want to do so to ensure the privacy of surveillance technology. So they want to watch us. They want to be able to do so in secrecy. And this is fundamentally at odds with our democracy and the way that most Americans want to live our lives. So with that, I really want to hand things over to Professor Graham, who can walk you through the report and its findings some more. Thank you.
Great. Megan, before you get started, Professor Graham, sorry, before you
Okay.
get started, Cindy, could you please drop the press release into the chat again? We have some people who came in after you did it the first time. And just to
Sure.
direct people to that, the report is in there. There is a press packet with photos, including a short video of some ALPRs. There is also the documents used in the report, the open records requests, the correspondence, and things like that. So with that, Professor Graham, why don't you get started? Thank you.
Great. So, hello, everybody. My name is Professor Megan Graham. I'm an associate clinical professor at the University of Iowa College of Law, where I direct the Technology Law Clinic. As was mentioned earlier, some of my students were really the folks behind doing this research and drafting this report. So, I'm very proud of the work that they put in. I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology, kind of how did we get to this report, what work went into it, and then I'll talk a little bit about the key findings, which are covered in more depth, both in the report and in the media release that you all have access to. So a little bit about our methodology and our research and how we got to this report. So when we initially began looking at automated license plate reader use in Iowa, we found that there was kind of scattered information. A number of folks in this room have done some reporting on what was going on in their community, but there was no not even comprehensive, but there was no collected place for those stories and that research to live. So the goal of the report was to take a step back and look more systematically at ALPR use in a wide array of Iowa communities to see what is happening on the ground in the state. To that end, as was mentioned earlier, we requested records from 48 agencies in Iowa. Among those 48 were places that we knew at the start had automated license plate readers in their community. But then we also tried to make sure we were capturing a broad cross-section of the state. So we sent requests to cities, suburbs, smaller towns, rural areas. We also sent requests to the counties where those cities and towns are located. We also made requests to the cities and counties that are homes to the major state universities. Like I said, trying to get a really good sense of what was going on around the state, not just in the most populous regions. So one of the things, or the thing that we did was we sent the same substantive request to every agency that we surveyed for this report. A copy of that request that we sent is in the report itself. It's one of the appendices. There's a slight caveat here, which is for some agencies, we had pretty recently requested some of the same information about a year ago. So for those, the request they received was tailored a little bit, so we weren't being duplicative and wasting public records officials' time. So we were trying to make sure we got the same information, or we requested the same information of every agency. Iowa public records law says that agencies need to respond within 20 days. The majority of them did, and we are very grateful to the public records officers who were so helpful throughout our research. They were really wonderful in making sure we had access to information by and large. 5 agencies, as was mentioned earlier, have not yet responded to the substance of the request. So the Des Moines Police Department, that process has been quite slow. They have identified responsive records but have not shared them yet. We plan to make sure that once we have that information, it is shared with the public generally. And then Fremont County, Clinton Police Department, and Fayette County didn't respond despite repeated follow-ups. Mills County Sheriff's Office acknowledged our request but said they were unable to complete it because of staffing issues. On top of the public records request that we sent out, the clinic also conducted substantial independent legal and factual research, which is covered in much more depth in the report. So now our key findings. Our big first key finding is that automated license plate readers are widely used in Iowa, and there is a substantial network of surveillance of this kind across the state. Each place that has an automated license plate reader camera system, they collect their own data and they have control within the system about how widely it is shared, how accessible it is to other police and sheriff's offices. And one of the other things we realized is that not all of the agencies that we surveyed handle those choices about sharing their data the same. One of the other key findings just about how the system works, these are not normal traffic cameras that are triggered by a violation of the law, right? So a speed camera or a red light camera, they take a picture when you are speeding or have run a red light. But the point with automated license plate readers and how they function is they take pictures of every car that drives by them. So we're talking about hundreds of photos a minute. And the point behind them is to create these databases that can be searched down the road after the fact, rather than having information only collected when there is suspicion of wrongdoing. Another key finding that we had is that the number of cameras in each community that have automated license plate reader varies widely. Of the agencies that we surveyed and that we have heard from, Cedar Rapids has the most cameras. They have 76. They have a 2-year contract with Flock Safety for those cameras at a cost of just under $500,000. West Des Moines has 64 cameras. Clinton County has 58. Other numbers are included in the report and the records in the Google Drive, so you'll be able to look about what's going on a little bit closer to home for all of you. Another finding that we had is that communities in Iowa use several different vendors for their automated license plate readers if they have them. As Ms. Bettis-Austin said earlier, Flock Safety is the largest vendor that we found. That was 27 agencies that responded to our request have Flock Safety cameras. The Flock contracts range in length, but most commonly they are 2-year long contracts. Other large players in the state of Iowa are Axon and Motorola Solutions. 7 agencies that we surveyed have contracts with Axon. Those contracts tend to be either 5 or 10 years long. And then 4 agencies use Motorola Solutions, which is now the parent company of what used to be called Vigilant Solutions. So folks who have been following automated license plate readers for a while might be more familiar with the name Vigilant Solutions. That is now Motorola Solutions. The study also found that the agency's policies vary as well. 30 agencies disclosed their automated license plate reader policies to us. Some of those agencies have an automated license plate reader policy, but do not currently have automated license plate reader cameras. And we also noted that there are differences from city to city, town to town, and county to county on things like how long and how the ALPR data is retained, who has access to the automated license plate reader system and can run searches on it. There are also differences in what information about automated license plate reader searches is shared with the public. And all of those differences mean that there's a real patchwork in place in Iowa. Iowans' privacy is affected by these policies, and because of the policy differences, the policy shifts and change as Iowans drive from place to place around the state. Our final big key takeaway for all of you is that the scope and number of searches that are run using automated license plate reader databases is all over the map. In our research, we identified 19 transparency portals from agencies in Iowa that have Flock cameras in particular. So 19 transparency portals that are only for Flock cameras. Some of these numbers are in the report about the total vehicle detections, hot lists, and similar information. But we actually recalculated those numbers earlier this week, so we'd have the most up-to-date information to share with you. So for just those 19 agencies, between November 8th and December 7th, 2025, there were 4,201,855 vehicle detections. There were an average of 9,615 vehicle detections per camera in those 19 agencies and 13 hot list hits per 1,000 vehicles that were captured. So we're talking about quite a number of photos being taken. And again, that's just 19 communities in the state. Some of those agencies that have these transparency portals also allow you to download a log of searches that have been run within and the justification for those searches within that law enforcement agency. So those search logs, where we have them, are included in the Google Drive. They're also updated regularly on the transparency portal. So if you want to look a little bit more specifically about what a particular agency is doing, that information should be available to you. And with that, those are the kind of end of the key findings that I have. Veronica, do we want to transition?
Thank you, Professor Graham. That was great. Thank you. All right, so now let's open it to reporter questions. You can either raise your hand or you can pose a question in the chat, whatever works for you. And Lori Bellin, you have a question.
Thank you. One of my guest authors has written about this issue with these cameras, and she also found very inconsistent responses from local governments in central Iowa on whether they would provide the information at all. You mentioned that there's no legislation in this area. Have you spoken with legislators? Is there a draft bill, or has a bill ever been introduced in this area that would regulate this kind of camera in a useful way? And then my second question is, and I have unfortunate experience with this, that sometimes when you file a records request that people don't like, the next thing the legislature does is they add a whole new exemption to the open records law to say that records are confidential. And are you concerned that the legislature may step in and say that all information from license plate readers is confidential?
So I am going to kick it over to my wonderful colleague, Pete McRoberts, who is our policy director, to talk about the legislation in Iowa piece, which gets beyond the scope of this report, which is really just an accounting of the existing problems and the status quo in Iowa as we were able to capture it through this survey across the state. I do want to just say, relevant to your question, because I think it's so important, that as part of this report, the students did legal research, and they included information about other Midwestern states that do have laws that provide some protection. And we would say some, are more protective and some are less protective. But it absolutely is the case that if you're somebody driving through the country, you are going to be more protected in terms of these concerns in Illinois, Kansas, Minnesota, and Nebraska. You're going to hit Iowa and it's, the Wild West. So because we don't have any statewide meaningful protections that would apply here. So with that, just sort of statement of the law in Iowa compared to other places, I'd like to kick it over to Pete.
Sure. Hi, Lori. And to get started, first of all, thanks again to Professor Graham and to the researchers. This is really splendid work and so informative. To Lori's specific question, I'm not able to forecast specific language of legislation, but I am enthusiastic at the legislative response so far to not even just this report because it came out, but the subject matter generally. Legislators have been very interested in finding out facts such as that cities will generally argue that these things are there for crime prevention, but they see the conflict, given that that's not what a hot list is for. Legislators are aware that cities have even claimed that they don't let data be shared outside the town or the local jurisdiction. And they can see that responses like this, if we didn't know better, you'd think that the cities hadn't even read the contracts. So what I can say is this has gotten legislators' attention on the correct side of the issue. What we recommend right now is just press pause on these because there is such a varied and unpredictable local governing regime in the state with these things. And just frankly, the cities either don't know what they're doing or they want us to think they don't with respect to individual privacy protections. So our view is that all of these contracts really do need to be put on hold while the legislature concludes, what they'll do for either, what we hope is a comprehensive fix on privacy so that if these things are used, they are used for appropriate reasons that protect people's privacy. The legislature has acted in one way specific to ALPRs. You all remember a couple of years ago when the legislature reformed the automatic traffic enforcement camera system in the state. And there was a line in that bill, I'm sorry, in that law now, which does require data to be retained by ALPRs no longer than 30 days. We think that's a good jumping off point, and the fact that there has been legislative action specifically to prevent the development of a surveillance state, even among these surveillance cities, we're enthusiastic that the legislature can move in the right direction on this.
Great, thank you, Pete. Lori, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Raise your hands, sing out, post in the chat.
Mary Wrigley, KETV. I guess, what are you hoping the outcome of making this report public will be?
Who wants to take that?
I think I'll start and then I'll invite my colleagues to jump in. Megan and Pete, if you'd like to add anything, please do. I'll just say, I think first and foremost, accounting for what's going on and informing the public about the ways that local governments are surveilling them that they probably don't know about, and collecting data about their locations, just how sensitive some of that information can be, the way that all of this data can be pooled to really track someone and their daily comings and goings, providing a picture of where they go to church, where they go shop at the grocery store, if they go to the doctor's office, if they attend a political rally, all of those things, that this is really important. And we want Iowans to be aware that this is happening, because that really is important in and of itself to the ways that government are accountable on our behalf to us in our democracy, but also because I think that it calls for the next question, right? Which is like, what should be done now that we understand that these risks exist, that our privacy is likely being violated in all sorts of ways that we didn't realize. What do we need to do? I think some of the examples of statewide protections that are in other states that are cited are helpful. And I know Pete can talk more about what good model statewide policy would look like. But really, the foundation for that is making sure that Iowans have just the basic information about what's going on. So that's really, I think, aim number one of the report.
Great, thank you. Any ads? Megan or Professor Graham? Sorry, I keep bungling
No, it's
your-
okay. I just want to echo Rita's point here, which is, our main goal was ensuring that Iowans know what is happening in their communities where automated license plate readers are concerned. People are better empowered to make decisions about what is going on in their community if they have a better sense of what these systems are, what these cameras do, and then how they're being used. And so our big goal was more information, and hopefully the report provides that.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Graham. Andrew Pfeiffer has a question. Andrew, why don't you go? Oops, Andrew, your audio is really scrambled. Yep, still bad. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. I'll tell you what, could you put your question in the chat? And while you do that, Katrina Markle has a question. So why don't we take Katrina's question and you can put your question in the chat.
Yeah, so I was thinking about the fragmented way that some of these, first of all, fragmentation from state to state, and just the inconsistency about how there's regulation, there's not regulation, there are different levels of regulation, and even jurisdiction to jurisdiction in Iowa, how these license plate readers are being handled. Is the ACLU, I realize that the focus here was Iowa, but is the ACLU looking at this at a national level? Do we need national legislation to really protect people? Because it's going to be so inconsistent from state to state, it sounds like.
So the National ACLU is deeply concerned about ALPRs and has done a lot of work through the sort of privacy and technology legal experts that are at the National ACLU about this. And that work really serves as a foundation for our jumping off point as an affiliate to look at this in Iowa and see what's happening here. There are some recommendations I know that the national office makes. This is an area that states typically regulate in terms of governing what police do in these areas rather than at the national level. And I think that the existing recommendations from the National ACLU are geared at state legislatures. But really, that's a good one for Pete to correct me there if I'm wrong about any of that.
Nope. But there's, if you, or you can contact us later on, there's a wealth of information about national analyses that the ACLU National has made available to people, which of course has been a great resource for us. And we encourage you to take a look at it. We can enable that if you'd like.
All right. Let's move on to Andrew's question now put into the chat. And it's actually kind of recapping something we had said earlier. Andrew might have joined a little bit later. The question was, what are the agencies that have not disclosed information about their ALPRs, and what's the reason for not doing that? Megan, maybe, or sorry, Professor Graham, maybe would you take that one since you were the person handling the open records request directly?
Sure. So I would point everybody for really in the weeds, granular information about this to Appendix C of the report. It's a chart that kind of catalogs for the 12 or 13 categories of information that we sought, what every agency provided or didn't provide. I would say that the agencies really ranged. There were the 5 we spoke about earlier, Des Moines Police Department, Mills County Sheriff's Office, Fayette County, Fremont County, and Clinton Police Department, who just didn't provide a substantive response of any kind to any of the questions. There also, for almost every agency, there was some subset of information that they didn't provide. By and large, when they didn't provide something, that was because they affirmatively told us, we don't have this thing that you're asking for. But there were instances where agencies would withhold information that they would say, we do have responsive records, but they are confidential. Usually that was related to law enforcement or security concerns was what they articulated to us. But when they gave those responses, it was not generally, you can't know anything about automated license plate reader use in our jurisdiction. It was something more like, we won't tell you exactly where the cameras are located in our jurisdiction, or we won't tell you how many erroneous hits we have, for example. So it was a real range, and the detailed description of who said what and their justification is captured in that appendix.
Thank you. And I would direct everybody to, at the end of the report, probably around like page 36, 37-ish, there's something called Appendix C that's just this monster chart that really categorizes everything. And Andrew, it'll show you very quickly who didn't respond and with some details on the reasoning. And then as to what Professor Graham was saying, for each thing that they didn't provide, for example, one category of information, they would say it's confidential, but they provided records on another category. So it's a really good sort of snapshot of the findings of the project. Going on, James.
Can I also just add that
please, yes.
the substantive responses, we've made all of that available. So in the press materials Veronica has shared, not only our request out to agencies, but all of the information that they provided back are all available to you. So if you wanted to look in, dig into a particular police department, you will have everything that we have about
that press packet. I think it says like background documents or something like that in that folder.
I would like to also add that this issue of the varied responses, even as something is established as an open records request, is a good example that cities who have engaged in these contracts either are not equipped to deal with the consequences of them or to protect the privacy of their residents, or they're unwilling to. the patchwork of responses to this is really a good eye opener as far as how problematic these contracts are. Right? You know, like I said a second ago, it's almost as if they didn't read the contracts when city officials themselves are declining or arguing that the terms of the contract itself don't apply to the city. I had it happen once where a high-ranking city official just flat out denied that their city was transferring data into their vendor's system when it's explicit that the contract gives a worldwide non-exclusive license for any of that data that's collected. So if this is willful ignorance, that's terrible. I don't think it is. That's why the value of this report is an educational tool for the general public, for policymakers, to include city council members and state legislators. This is a good day for openness and for transparency. So I again can't thank you enough, but I do want to get it out there in a very direct way that these cities are being targeted by companies and they're either getting enrolled or they're doing it voluntarily.
Okay.
I'm sorry to pile on. I have to provide one very concrete anecdote, which is that, you know, in doing these records requests about this very sophisticated technology, some of the responses that the students got back from law enforcement required them to submit their records requests via fax. You know, so these are, and I don't say that to embarrass any of the police departments or agencies, just to say that, you know, there are varying levels of technological sophistication that we all have. And we would expect and desire that the people who have access to this incredibly sophisticated technology that can violate our privacy and our rights in really profound ways would know what they're doing, would have the ability to understand it and safeguard our rights to the extent that they decide to engage with technology at all. And I don't think that that is the case, given the results of the report.
Mm-hmm. And since we keep referencing it, Cindy, do you mind dropping the link to that press packet in again? Because anybody who comes in later to the call won't have access to the previous chat. Okay, we have a question from James Kelly, a couple questions. Let's ask the first question first. Did researchers uncover any instances of cameras in Iowa being used for immigration enforcement?
So this is a great question. We've certainly seen this in other states. There's been substantial public reporting. Within the limited number of transparency portals and search logs that we received back, or that we have access to, we did not see any specific mentions as the justification being immigration over the last 30 days, right? That's the kind of length of time where we can see the justifications for ALPR searches. However, there were some justifications where it's really hard to tell what was going on in that investigation. There were a couple of mentions of just sus or sus activity. And I don't know what that could be on its face, things like that. So no specific instances where the justification was immigration. And I can't say one way or the other whether it is being used in that way, either, you know, based on the records we have access to, or there are a number of jurisdictions for which we just don't have that level of transparency in the first place.
Thank you, Professor Graham. Second question that James had. Are there plans for any investigations into private companies who have contracted with ALPR vendors? And I'm not sure if there's any specifics about private companies, like which private companies, but is that maybe is that
So
a
I'm
big
happy
question?
to start answering this, and then
Please.
Rita, you may have additional thoughts. So I think one thing that's important to know about automated license plate readers is they are certainly used by government agencies, whether that's for law enforcement or parking and transportation, or various other uses. Automated license plate readers, the same vendors, are also selling these products to private businesses and to homeowners associations across the country. Those getting records about those types of searches or those types of sales is a little bit more complicated because those private businesses and homeowners associations are usually not subject kind of at a baseline level. Sometimes they are subject to the public records law, but very rarely and only in specific fact patterns. So at the moment, I have, thought about it, but there's no plan to try to dig in on those issues just because of the harder to access data in that kind of situation.
Thanks. We have another question from Marissa Payne. Absent any possible state law change, is there language local governments can put into their agreements with these vendors to better safeguard data and limit the purpose for which ALPRs are used? And then let's ask that question first, and then Marissa has a second question attached to that, so let's answer that after.
If I could take a stab at that first one, I'd like to.
Please. Okay. Yes, Pete.
At the beginning of the day, the cities need to get out of these contracts. These are largely one-sided contracts. They need to have analysis by their city attorneys, which they uniformly don't. And so our recommendation to cities is, number one, just don't do this, and look at all your options to return to protecting individual privacy by using any legal means to get out of those contracts. Ultimately, cities need to be aware that there are two people at the negotiating table when these contracts are put in front of them, and they usually just roll over like they don't have any role to play, but they do. And so I would advise any city council, when solicited by this company, to put their terms on the table. Go ahead and propose to the company that data will not be shared outside the jurisdiction or outside the state, whatever. There's ample things. But the point is, the cities, one after the other, they fell like dominoes to these companies, and they uniformly refused to assert their own power or to show the company that it takes two to tango. So city council members, mayors, if they are being approached by these vendors, which they will, I mean, in some respects, the vendors are treating these local governments like fish in a barrel, and they've got to stand up and make themselves aware. And one of the, without lobbying, this is an educational document. The more stories that come out, the more reports that come out, the more lawsuits that come out, the harder it is for these municipalities to claim ignorance as to what they're getting into. So maybe the first city that signed up one of these had good intentions and intended to use these things for only appropriate purposes or for actual ongoing offenses. But all the ones that have followed, you really have to question their judgment here. I expect that their motives are fine, but the judgment is terrible. So every city council member needs to have a hard talk with their city attorney and their mayor. Every city official needs to take a look and see what their cities are doing to abuse people's privacy. And this is the rub. You can have a city policy that is very protective internally, as in only one person can access that data, only in these certain circumstances, but they have no power over the data once it leaves their jurisdiction. So you've got an issue in which someone in town X in Iowa may have a good local policy, but it doesn't change the fact that they are still totally subservient to the company and to the contract that they willingly signed. So there are no clean hands here with the cities who have signed these contracts. They really have been derelict in their duties.
Okay, thank you, Pete. The other question that Marissa asked is, are there any Iowa communities that have more defined limits on the purpose for ALPR use? That we know of.
Megan, do you want to take that one? I know it's all set out in the report.
Yeah, so there are some. So for example, Iowa City only uses their automated license plate readers for traffic and parking enforcement. So that's one example of a jurisdiction that has automated license plate reader cameras, but uses them for a more narrow purpose, for example. And then there's kind of a range that is captured in more depth about how, some agencies limit who within their either police department or sheriff's office has access. So it's not kind of everybody who works for the office. Instead, it's a narrower set of, say, uniformed officers, things like that. So there's a real wide range. I would say by and large, though, a lot of the policies that the jurisdictions have are similar. There are a lot of similarities, at least in the terms that they have, or the policy, like the components that they have. So there is variation when you get into the weeds, but outside, a jurisdiction like Iowa City saying we only use it for this limited purpose, otherwise you see kind of a lot of similarities across. And some of the biggest variation is, for example, in who has access, for what purpose.
Thank you, Professor Graham. Here's a question from Katrina Merkel again. Great question. What action can citizens take to seek more transparency from their local governments and law enforcement agencies? And Pete, that seems appropriate for you to take, perhaps?
Sure. In fact, our very own shop, I want to send a shout out to our team led by Becca Eastwood and Erica Dubin-Bars. We've actually got a very robust local education program right here at the ACLU of Iowa. So number one, please feel free to contact us for any information about that. In fact, I think it was just the night before last, we had a seminar on educating the public as to how, number one, what's going on, and number one, what they can do. So get involved with us. We would encourage all people to take part in this education program, the Protect Our Privacy program that's being done right here in house by Becca and Erica, by our team. So that's the first one, and that is a shameless plug for people to get involved on our local education and advocacy. Now, but second, the first step for people is just simply to call their city council member and ask what's the status, and their council member may not know, but they do tend to be responsive to locals, and if not, people tend to know that. So regardless, we think that it's advisable and it's the best first step to just call your local member of the city council and ask them to let you know what's going on. Education is the first step. The cliche, knowing is half the battle. Well, clearly with the distribution of these things all over the state, a lot of the government officials didn't know a thing, but the public sure can, and that's what we're working on.
I dropped into the chat a couple things building on what Pete said. So any individual who's interested in finding out more about what they can do, volunteer, advocacy, or even get pointed in the right direction for finding out what's going on in their community, can email our advocacy team at outreach@aclu-org. We also have a whole page about ALPRs that I would really direct you to. And there's even a sign up if you do want to take that step to get involved, find out more information. You just click that button, put in a couple key facts, and you can be plugged into a lot of really terrific information about ALPRs in your community. So we have another question, Katie Koppel. Her question is, in your opinion, what can law enforcement agencies do to ease concerns listed in this report while also utilizing these cameras? And who would like to tackle that?
I'll start, and I'll maybe Pete, you could pick it up from there. I'll just reiterate what Pete has said, that I think the first thing to really, for local law enforcement to ask themselves is whether they should be using these cameras at all, especially if they have not been using them in a way that safeguards against these risks. There are some reasons why, maybe some fundamental lack of understanding about the technology, the way it works, how they're sharing data, all of that. So I think that's an important point. And I know I don't mean it to be a dodge, but I do just want to, reiterate that point because I think it's an important one. And then the second one is, we have to ask the question about whether it is appropriate for this to be left to local law enforcement agencies to be regulating, or whether we really need to ensure that we have broader uniform minimum protections in place for all Iowans. And, I'll just say, my area is less the legislative piece. I'll just say, this is an area where there are a number of fundamental constitutional protections that are implicated by this technology and the cameras. There are U.S. Supreme Court cases that say you need a warrant before you can use a GPS tracking device to track a car, and give law enforcement in public, operating on public roads, and give law enforcement the ability to, put together a comprehensive record of a specific person's comings and goings, that you need a warrant to do that. And so there are some early cases looking at ALPRs in state courts all outside of Iowa that are looking at whether ALPRs are like that or if they're like something else. Is a warrant required? When is a warrant required? And I will just say, the courts are not well equipped, as we've seen, to respond in a timely way to protect people's rights. And that's for a number of reasons. Structurally, it's very difficult to get into court because of qualified immunity and other factors. Practically, it can be impossible to know if your rights have been violated. If you've been subject to an error on a hot list or not, you're likely not ever going to know it. And even if you do, you may not be able to pull together the resources or have the time or the interest to go through litigation to try to protect your rights. So I just wanted to say that I think, it is incumbent on all of us to look in the policy arena and not necessarily to the courts to protect these rights. But that doesn't mean that we think that the rights aren't being violated or that the protections aren't there. Just that it will, I think, unfortunately, it's going to be a slow and painful and long process to have that kind of express protection through a court opinion. So I guess, Pete, you might want to talk more about the legislative piece.
Yeah, I think, first of all, we've seen instances in which like larger towns in Iowa have entered into these contracts just based upon the signature of an appointed police chief instead of, the elected representatives. That's the first one. I think the entity of, using this can't really fairly do that without putting, number one, rights at risk, but number two, without bypassing the local elected forms of government. This was a really heated controversy in a town not that long ago where the city council and the elected representatives were completely blindsided by the fact that they were now obliged to this contract because of police personnel. And so I'm not questioning anybody's motives, but that process just doesn't work. Second, like Rita indicated, law enforcement offices have special training on constitutional rights, on protections, and so forth, and they just got to use it. And that is something which should just be a truism. But what we see again in city after city, there's the socialization of, well, I'll grab that data because I want it. And again, like Rita said, if it was anything else, it would require a warrant. So I want us and law enforcement can be helpful here to number one, recognize there's a problem with all of this data of their own, residents and constituents being sent out all over the country and indeed all over the world. So they can play a really constructive role here. And again, when I say they, there's hundreds of jurisdictions in the state. So we're going to see some offices that are more responsive to transparency, accountability, and privacy protections, and some that aren't. But for chiefs and officers who are insistent on protecting people's constitutional rights, there's a role for them to play, and we welcome in. The water's warm.
Thank you, Pete. We have a few more minutes. Probably can take one more question if anybody has one. I've also dropped into the chat if you have any follow-up questions after the media conference. There's an email there and a text that you can reach out to me at, and I'll do my best to get back to you very quickly. All right. I think we don't have any further questions at the moment. So thank you so much, everybody, for your time. And thank you, Rita, Pete, Professor Graham, for joining us and doing this amazing work.